Oh, hi there. Ollie Anderson here. Welcome to this video where I want to talk about the dance that is in full unfolding in nearly all of our lives between the ego on one hand, the shadow on the other, and the truth that can emerge in between them somewhere, that we can get a grasp that's real and kind of face these things with acceptance and awareness and take action on what we learn. Although normally I say it's the other way around. Awareness, acceptance, and action. I've talked about this stuff a lot. Like on this YouTube channel, I've kind of alluded to these things here and there, but I don't think I've ever really made a video that is just specifically about this relationship between the ego and the shadow. And it's something that keeps popping up in my life all over the place. I wrote about it in my book, which I don't have near me, or do I? No. But anyway, Shadow Life, Freedom from Bullshit in an Unreal World. Don't read that book if you're sensitive, because I wrote it from the point of view of my shadow, and it's kind of offensive in places. I've had some death threats, literally, from various people, because it was just so real, and not everyone can handle it. That's what I tell myself anyway. But anyway, this dance between the ego and the shadow is super, super, super important to understand, because it's ultimately something that is driving all of our lives, whether we know it or not. And as per usual, it all boils down to our relationship with reality. And on a deeper level, understanding that reality is ultimately about wholeness instead of fragmentation, about everything being connected to everything else, everything having a relationship with itself, even though it's all just one big relationship relating to itself at multiple different levels. And that there is a constant flow and a drive within all of us towards more wholeness or connection at that deep, deep level. Some people might call this truth, some people might call it God, some people might call it the universe, some people might call it source. The language is irrelevant. The fact is that in the human experience, we can taste wholeness. And if we get out of our own way without the mindset, identity, ego bullshit blocking our path or causing us to hold back and hesitate from our real lives, then we will flow with that naturally. It's always happening. It's what we're designed to do, to go with that flow whilst making sure that we're not so open-minded our brains fall out, by ensuring that we're moving in a way that is truly real, in the sense that it's something that's called from the deepest parts of us and not just the ideas we picked up. So that was a very long rambling introduction, but I just want to say that the ego basically is a load of bullshit, and the shadow is the opposite of that, because the opposite of bullshit is the truth. But unfortunately for most of us, we get programmed and deconditioned to detach from and to disown the things about ourselves that are true because of social conditioning and self-hypnosis. Social conditioning is all the stuff that we pick up in our earlier years and beyond to reinforce the script that we're not good enough, that we have to be a certain way, that we have to live a life that is basically something sourced from the outside in instead of the inside out, blah, 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 blah. And then self-hypnosis is all of the emotional stuff that causes us to think and feel in a way that is aligned with those bullshit messages that cause us to be fragmented in the first place. Now, in relation to the ego and the shadow, it's very simple, but if you understand all the stuff that I just ranted and raved about in relation to wholeness and fragmentation, it becomes even simpler. And ultimately, you can realize that the only thing stopping you from living a real life is your fear about the truth, about who you are and what you need to do and what you're being called to do. And when I talk about calling, who knows where the calling comes from? It could be from your unconscious, it could be from God or something higher, it depends how you want to look at it. But at the end of the day, there will be something in your life that you've been called to do that is going to move you towards more wholeness on your own terms. And the only thing that stops you resisting that is the ego stuff. So maybe I'm making this too complicated. Let's break it down to a very, very basic level, which is to look at where the ego comes from. So I always say, especially on my podcast, if you've heard my podcast, that the average life of the average human being is structurally the same for all of us. It basically goes like this. We're born, we're whole, we're connected to life, we're connected to ourselves, we're spontaneous, we're free, we're not overthinking things, we're just living in the present moment and we're doing what we need to do. We're innocent and all this kind of stuff because we're not judging ourselves Not that judgment is real anyway. That's just something that we pick up as we go through life. And this state of wholeness is ultimately the way that we're born. If we're unlucky, something's going to happen that will traumatize us in our early years. But for most of us, we get a few solid years where we're not really living in the world. We're living in life, because that's just what kids do. But then we start to grow up. We pick up a sense of identity. We realize that we're separate from other people because our bodies are fragmented. We start to perceive things through the lens of that fragmentation. Then people in our lives will start to shame us, basically, or make us feel guilty. They both have the same effect, which is that we start to disown parts of ourselves that are real. So let's just say, for example, maybe you're an angry kid. Your dad or whoever might be threatened by that anger. So they make you feel ashamed of it, or they scare you into hiding it away. So that gets shoved down into the shadow territory. You disown it, basically, and create an ego version of yourself, an identity where that part of you doesn't exist. And it doesn't just have to be negative things like anger. Not that anger is negative, it's neutral. It's like anything else, it depends what you do with it. But it could be good things as well. Maybe it's your love. Like, you're a very loving, joyful person. For whatever reason, you have some miserable bastards that are bringing you up. They are triggered by your joy because of their own bullshit. And so they shame you, and you end up hiding your joy. You become detached from it. You become very robotic. Whatever it is, you create a little ego version of yourself that has disowned the joy. Now, that can apply to anything. Like, we're all different. We all go through different experiences. And so we all have different things that are hiding within the shadow territory. But the structure is always the same. Something happens that makes us disown something real about who we are. We create the ego version, or put the mask on, however you want to say it, which is just a truncated version of ourselves without the whole parts being brought to the surface anymore, because we can't, because of our environment, whatever it is. And then we go through life wearing this mask. And as time progresses, we basically forget that we're wearing that mask in the first place. We think the mask is who we are. That causes all kinds of problems, because then we're filtering everything that we experience and try to do, including the goals that we chase and the vision we have and the relationships we get in and blah, blah, blah. We're filtering all that stuff through the lens of the ego, through the filter of the ego, which means, because it's a filter, it's always going to be letting less light in or less truth in than you need, basically, to live a real life. If we're lucky, some of us will have some kind of an epiphany or something where we start to realize that the mask is just a fragmented version, and that there are things deep down inside that need to come to the surface. For most of us, this epiphany can be accelerated through creativity, which again is the whole point of my podcast, Creative Status, because creativity is a vehicle for making the unconscious conscious, bringing the shadow to the surface so you can get the ego out of the way and become more whole. And that's why so many people out there have these creative urges that they can't explain, but that if they follow are going to lead them where they need to be, which is to wholeness, truth. Because the truth has been buried beneath the surface, but the truth can't go anywhere. We always have to drive towards wholeness, which for most of us is hidden in the shadows, because we've just get so used to not being whole, been disconnected, been stressed, living in fear, having limiting beliefs, blah, blah, blah. All of those things are just symptoms of this fundamental problem, which is disconnection. Creativity or inspired action are the things that bring these real parts of you back to the surface. And I guess the final thing I really want to say in this video, which was supposed to be short but isn't, is the ego and the shadow are in a constant kind of dance. That's basically what I said at the start of the video. But what I mean by that is that because the stuff in your shadow never goes anywhere, it is constantly trying to break through the surface of your life, which is a reflection of the ego, so that you can integrate these things and become whole again. These things, whatever they are, and they can be good or bad, really they're just neutral because they're all real, like I said. Those things are something that you need to express in your life if you want to feel good. And so the only thing stopping you is your relationship with yourself. It means that you have to let go of who you think you are, so you can allow who you actually are to come to the surface. And the good news is you don't really need to do anything. Maybe you have to follow up on the inspired actions, or you have to follow your creativity where it's going to lead you, because inspired action and creativity, like I said, are just ways of the unconscious becoming conscious, so you can see the truth about who you are. and what life is and how we're all connected and blah, blah, blah. But once you figure out what the shadow is trying to bring up, and you'll get lots of hints in life, you might keep seeing the same patterns, or you might see signs, whatever you want to call them, which are really just metaphors that your unconscious mind is paying attention to and then getting you to pay even more attention to and follow up on and figure out what it means so that you can basically bring this stuff up. But anyway, once you figure out what it is that you're supposed to do, or what the inspired actions are supposed to be that you're supposed to take, you realize that you actually have no choice. And when you realize you have no choice, that's when you can get out of your own way and you just go with it. Because this process, like I keep saying, is always unfolding. The shadow is real. This is the ultimate lesson I am basically learning, that the main thing that is hidden in the shadows for all of us is the truth. Because we have been conditioned to believe in something that is not the truth, which is the ego. And when we see that for what it is, which is a bunch of illusions and lies to some extent that we've picked up and that we're telling ourselves or hypnotizing ourselves with, then we realize that we can just let go of it. And when we let go of it, that's when the creativity keeps surging. It's when we keep finding inspiration to take the action that's going to take us where we need to be. It's when life gets easier, because the only thing really causing the stress in our lives, in 90% of the cases, is the attachment to the ego, which is bringing friction and frustration and misery to our lives because we're denying what life is. And so if you can face the shadow or allow it to just do what it needs to do and to express it in the way that it needs expressing, then you become more real in the sense of returning to who it is that you're supposed to be and refining those qualities and getting stronger and evolving and blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, you have the energy to flow with life instead of to force life, because the only reason you would force life is to keep the ego in place so you don't have to face yourself. And I don't know, something like that. It was basically a video I wanted to make about how this dance is constantly unfolding. You can get out of your own way by realizing that the version of you that's getting in your way is not you in the first place. And then things will just flow in the way they need to because everything is moving towards wholeness. And if you ride those waves, you'll be more creative, you'll have more energy, you'll feel more free, you'll feel more alive, and you'll be more connected to the truth, because the only thing that you can hide from yourself is the truth. And so when you ride with it, well, the rest just kind of falls into place. So yeah, that was a bullshit video. I don't know why it's a bullshit, because it's obviously not. But you know what I mean. I was just trying to be edgy at the end of the video. Hope that helps. Take care. Peace.